Hey everybody. We've been doing a lot with log footage lately and LUTs and really high-end stuff, and as a colorist, that's the stuff you like to get. That's the stuff you like to work on because it's easy to make that stuff look good. This stuff was not shot on log. This was all shot on our ENG cams by our news photographers. We did a story about people who are taking therapy animals on airplanes, and they're taking all kinds of critters, peacocks, ducks. One lady tried to bring an alligator on the airplane because Florida. Yeah. This makes a great news story because just the fact that someone tried to bring a duck and a peacock on an airplane, it's just too great not to promote and not to cover. So when we decided to cover this story, we sent our photogs out to Logan Airport, and they met this man who's a steward on an airline, and they probably caught this guy in between flights. They talked to him for about 10 minutes, and he probably had to go back to work. So it looks like they put a light on him, but it's not like they're going to use a Cinema Prime, shoot it in log, and spend 2 hours lighting him. Now, there's nothing wrong with this image, but for a promo, we can certainly spruce it up a bit. So that's where I come in. So let's take a look at the scopes. It looks a little hot. Got some hot spots up here, so let's try to bring that down a little bit. Now, the first note, I almost always do exposure just to see what I'm working with, so we can bring that down a little bit. Bring the lift and the gamma down, put some crunch into this image. So I'm going to put a little more saturation in it. A lot of the news footage we get, the chroma is probably technically correct, but when they put it into our server, I've noticed you lose a little bit of chrominance. And because I come from the promo world, I want these things to pop. I want the things to jump off the screen. So I'll almost always add a little bit of chroma. And I'm looking at this image, and to me, it looks a little yellow. Now, the exposure is looking pretty good, but I'm looking here at his shirt and at his jacket here in the background. It's just kind of got an abundance of yellow in it. So I'm going to push things towards blue. Let's see where we go. Put some blues into the blacks. Crush the blacks a little bit more. Bring up my gamma. Gamma up a little more. So we've gone from this kind of yellow, kind of flat. You can look at the scopes. The blacks weren't really kind of crushed in this image. The midtones are a bit high. The highlights are very high. So I like to put my vector scope on 2x zoom so I can really see where that chrominance is falling. And you can see here, this is the original. To me, it looked kind of yellow. That's the first node. Made it a little bit magenta-y, added a little bit of blue in there, and that's a good starting spot. Certainly a little better than this. This looks a little washed out, a little flat, a little yellow. So that's looking pretty good. Let's move on to the next node. I'll almost always adjust curves, especially on log footage, but I'll do it in Rec 709 footage as this was shot in, just because it's an easy way to get some contrast. I'll bring the blacks down a little bit. And I'll bring my whites up a smidge. I'm looking at my scopes. These lights here are probably clipped. That's this stuff here. I can live with that. So now I'm looking at it a little more critically. I can see on the scopes here, this is the blob. You kind of want the blob in the middle, unless you have a really wacky colored shot. It's pushing a little bit to magenta. I'm going to go back into node 1, see if I can bring my magenta out of my gamma and my gain. And, you know, a slight adjustment, but it feels a little bit better. Suck some of that magenta out of there. So we're looking good. Our blacks look nice and sexy time here. We've got blacks. Our whites are pretty white. The picture overall feels a little cool, but that's fine. I'm okay with that. That's looking kind of interesting. So the rest of the picture is looking pretty good, but this guy's face now, it's a little dark and maybe a little too saturated. So I'm going to come down here and qualify it. Let's see what we got. I always start with the low. I don't know why. It seems to pull back the most for me. I'll adjust the high. Let me get these parts here. The next thing I'll adjust is saturation on the low end. See how much of his face we can get in there. It's pretty good. I don't want to get any of his hair in there. That might be a problem. I've noticed when I come up to hue and I adjust things, I'll adjust the center. You can see where it's moving. It's moving it left and right. That usually cleans up a lot of stuff. Sometimes I'll fiddle with width, but I've found moving the center back and forth will clean up a lot of what ails you. His hair here is kind of bothering me. I'm going to see if I can get some of that out. Nope. Okay. So looking pretty good. Come in, clean out the blacks, clean up the whites. There we go. Blur it. All right. Now his head is moving, but not that much. We might be able to get away with one of these just over his face. And we should be okay. This might kill us, that little thing flying out over there. That might kill us right there, but we'll see. So here's the man's face, and I'm going to adjust my gain and brighten up his face a little bit, which I have done. Brighter. I'm going to zoom in. I'm going to put this back to normal. His face looks a little weird. You've got a little green down here, it looks like. Kind of red. Let's see if we can come in and fix that up. So this is hue versus hue. And if you look what happens to the scope when I move this. So I've brightened up his face. I've made it a little redder. And to me, it's a little too saturated. So I'm going to come in here and turn down the saturation a little bit. When you start adjusting colors and crunching the blacks and adjusting your gamma, what that'll often do is make the picture more saturated, which is interesting for some parts and not interesting for other parts, particularly the face. If you have too much chroma in the face, it's going to make your subject look very weird. And the final thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here and just take some of the mid-tone details out of this man's face. This man is obviously not wearing any makeup. And with high-definition cameras, sometimes they'll pick up too much detail and too much stuff. They're almost too good. So I will often come in here and take the mid-tone details out, particularly on people's skin, particularly people who aren't wearing any makeup, especially people who aren't really lit properly. Not that this guy is lit poorly, but I'm sure the photographer just set up a single light and turned it on. So what I'm trying to do is make this man look as good as possible on camera. I'm sure he didn't wake up this morning thinking he was going to be on television. So we've come quite a long way from there to there, but we're not done yet. I'm going to add another node. You guys have seen me do this before. I'm going to add a shape, and I have my preset shapes here. Interview right, which means the subject is on the right-hand side of the frame. Bloop. It just basically pulls up this shape, which I can quickly adjust. If you're doing news or you do lots of interviews, if you're working on a reality show or a documentary where there's tons of interviews, you might want to take the 5 minutes to build a little preset like this. It doesn't look like it saves you a lot of time, but it does save me a lot of time. It's just one less thing I have to do. I can click on that button and have my shape. So he's looking pretty good there exposure-wise, but I want to knock out the background, so I come out here and add node outside. And I can bring down my lift and my gamma to kind of take away and darken up that background a little bit. I'll also come in here and do my power curves. Bring it down even. I got to be careful you don't do something like that. That's not very flattering. You got to watch the haloing effect. But, you know, I'll come in here, bring down the darks. Bring my gain a little bit down, too. Again, be very careful that you don't end up here. Maybe it was too much down in the gain. Bring it up a little bit. There we go. That's looking a little bit better. This is what the photographer shot. This is where we came from, and this is where we are right now. If you look at what I've done, crunched my blacks, sucked some yellow out of that picture, put some blue in that picture. We got more chroma in his face. There's a couple things in his face that look a little weird to me. Let's see if we can fix them. We've got this little yellowish tint here. I'm going to pick it and see what happens. So it's telling me it's this one because it lit up, see? The problem is it's adjusting all of this. So I'm going to undo that. I'm going to come here. I'm going to push my yellow button. Now this will stop it. It won't affect the rest of this line here. So when I do this, see how it's not moving anything down here? It's like a stop. So I'm going to come in here and let's look at this yellow patch of skin and see what happens. There we go. That's a little better. If you look in the scopes, I'll undo that. You see we've got this bit right here. That little piece of chroma is that little yellow piece right here. Now watch what happens when I go hue versus hue, meaning this hue is going to get spun around a little bit. And come in here, and I'm going to move it. So see how that is tighter now? That's just the man's face, probably a little bit too pink. I'll have to see it in context. But see what it did? It just got rid of that yellowy, greeny stuff on his face. And you just smooth that up a little smidge. You can take a look. That's without correction. That's with correction. Yeah, looking pretty good. Probably a little too pink. I'm just going to spin the hue. Spin that back to the left. You can see it's moving on the scope. So watch right here. I'll rarely use this hue corrector, but it's kind of downstream from all this. So once I dial in my face right, I get all the splotchy skin out of the face. I can come in here, and sometimes this works, sometimes it doesn't. I'm just going to do an overall hue adjustment because I've taken out all the splotchy bits of his skin. It's all one color, which is good, but what's bad is it's a little too pink. You can see it on the scope right here. Let me turn that off. It's right here, probably a little bit too far to the red. I'm just going to do an overall hue adjustment and bring that back to the left. So I just brought it back a little bit to the left. That's what was photographed. That's what it's corrected to. It's brighter. The yellow splotchies are gone. He has a nice, healthy skin tone. I mean, that's what was photographed. That's a little flat. And that's where we ended up. So I'm going to zoom out. Let's do this fit, and I'm going to play it. So we've got a decent-looking shot. The face looks good. The background is darker. It's no longer yellow, but the man's eyes seem a little dark to me. I'm sure the photog was in a big hurry. This guy is at work. He was in a big hurry. They didn't have time to do a proper highlight, but I can. So I'm going to add a note at the end. I'm going to draw a circle, fix this up, put it right over the man's eyes. Normally, I would turn the softness off. I just happen to know this one worked because I tracked it before. If you're having trouble tracking, turn the softness off, but I'm going to come in here and track it. I'm going to track pan, left and right, tilt, up and down. I'm not going to do zoom or Z if you're watching in Europe because he's not coming at us. I definitely want rotate, and I don't need 3D. So I'm going to play this down, and you can see it's tracked quite nicely to the man's eyes. So now I'm going to come in, I'm going to blur it even more, and I'm going to adjust my gain just a little bit. Not too much because you'll get raccoon eyes. So this is with it off. See, his eyes are kind of dark and sunken back. Maybe he's got like polarizing glasses, or maybe these are those glasses that kind of turn into sunglasses when you go on outside. Maybe that's why his eyes are dark. I'm not sure, but I can turn that on, off, on. A little too bright. Put it down a little bit. Off, on. Now we're going to have to watch this really closely to make sure he doesn't have raccoon eyes. And it's looking pretty good. So I've noticed an issue with the hair right here, some of those boiling edges. You can kind of see it here if you really look at it. See if you can take care of that. So I've drawn a mask. Let me see if I can track this mask. Let's see how the track looks. Pretty good, pretty good. I'm going to come in here. I'm going to tell it to invert the mask like that. Blur that sucker. Let's see what this looks like. See, the boiling edges, that little cubey thing that we saw before is now no longer happening in his hair. Let me turn this off. Now we have his hair there. See how we got some boiling edges right there? See how you can kind of sort of see it? Let me blow it way up. Yeah, right there. That's kind of annoying. That's what happens when you get boiling edges and you bring up the luminance. I brought up the gain on this man's face. So I turn this note off. You can see it picking up here, which is fine. You can bring up the gain, but when you do that, make sure you don't have any boiling edges. So I'm going to turn this mask on and we'll watch it again. And those little squares, those little boiling edges are now gone. And as a nice added bonus, we get to see the man's eyes a little bit more. So that's how I color corrected this man's interview for this promo. So that's what was shot. Again, there's nothing wrong with it. It's good, solid ENG footage. It was nicely framed, nicely composed. I like this hallway behind him. I like that the photog got that knocked out of focus. And this is perfectly acceptable for a news report. Actually, it's quite good for a news report. But for promos, I can take the time and make it a little better and bring it to that. So I hope this helped you guys. This is the 10th video I've done. Woo! Double digits. The big 1-0. And as usual, I will put the promo at the end. Please do me a favor, like and subscribe to this channel. I try to put a new video out every week, depending how busy I am. I plan to do 2 shots for this video, but it ran a little bit long, so you can click here for part 2. And happy correcting, everybody.
Dogs, peacocks, and ducks.
We've had issues with animals biting passengers.
It's not Noah's Ark. They're on an airplane.
They don't know how to behave.
Emotional support animals causing danger on board.
Biting crew members, urination, defecation.
We've showed you how people abuse the system. Now what airlines are doing about it. Tonight at 10 on Boston 25 News.